My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 38 years old when my parents canceled my birthday dinner 3 days before it was supposed to happen. Not because someone had died, not because there was a hurricane, not because my father had another health scare. They canceled because my younger brother Ethan had another situation. That's exactly how my mother said it. "Sweetheart," she began over the phone, her voice already carrying that familiar mixture of apology and expectation. "We're going to have to postpone your birthday. Ethan really needs us right now." I stood in my kitchen staring at 12 unopened bottles of wine lined up on the counter. The catering deposit had already been paid. My dining table was covered with handwritten place cards because I wanted the evening to feel personal, not fancy. After years of everyone being too busy, I had finally convinced my closest friends and a few relatives to spend one Saturday together. I smiled anyway. I always smiled first. "Oh," I said quietly. "Is Ethan okay?" There was a pause. He made a mistake. That could have meant almost anything. A car accident, a lost job, another breakup, another business idea that collapsed before it even had customers, another unpaid bill, another promise someone else had to keep for him. I didn't even ask which one. I already knew how the conversation would end. "We'll celebrate later," my mother said. Later. That word had followed me my entire life. "We'll celebrate later. We'll make it up to you later. You understand, don't you? You're the mature one. You're the strong one." By the time I hung up, I wasn't angry. I was just tired. There comes a point where disappointment stops feeling sharp. It becomes familiar, like an old scar you only notice when the weather changes. I walked around my house picking up decorations I'd bought the day before. Simple white flowers, new candles, a framed family photo I almost never displayed because looking at it always made me feel like I remembered a different childhood than everyone else. In the picture, Ethan was grinning with frosting all over his face. I was standing beside him, holding the cake steady so he wouldn't drop it. Even then, I looked like I was making sure someone else's moment didn't fall apart. That realization stayed with me longer than I expected. My phone buzzed again, a text from one of my friends. "Are we still on for Saturday? Can't wait to celebrate you." I stared at the message. Celebrate you? It felt strange reading those words. I had spent so much of my life making sure everyone else was okay that I honestly didn't know what it felt like to be celebrated. So I typed the same excuse I'd been typing for years. "Family emergency. We'll reschedule." Within seconds she replied, "Again?" Just one word, "again." I couldn't answer it. Because if I was honest, I didn't know how many times "again" had happened. Birthdays, graduations, promotions, the day I bought my first house, even my engagement party years earlier, before the relationship eventually ended. There had always been something, some crisis, some reason Ethan needed more attention, more money, more forgiveness, more chances. And every single time my parents looked at me with the same expression. The expression that said they already knew what my answer would be. Because Claire understands. Claire will be okay. Claire doesn't need us as much. I used to think that meant they believed in me. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, I boxed up the decorations and carried them into the garage. As I set the last box onto a shelf, I noticed another unopened package tucked behind it. Inside was a birthday gift I'd bought for my father months earlier. An expensive leather journal he'd admired but refused to buy for himself. I had forgotten to give it to him. For a second, I considered driving over, just to see him, just to check that everything really was all right. Maybe Ethan's emergency was serious this time. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe I was letting years of resentment color something completely innocent. I grabbed my keys. 40 minutes later, I pulled into my parents' driveway. Ethan's truck was already there. The front door was slightly open. I could hear voices inside. They weren't crying, they weren't panicking, they were laughing. I stopped before stepping onto the porch. Then I heard my father's voice, calm, relaxed, almost amused. "Don't worry," he told Ethan. "Claire will help us figure it out. She always does." The room erupted in relieved laughter. I stood there frozen, the birthday gift still in my hands. And for the first time in 38 years, I didn't feel like the daughter. I felt like the family insurance policy. Then my father said one more sentence, a sentence I was never supposed to hear. It changed everything I thought I knew about my place in that family. When people hear my story now, they usually ask the same question. Why didn't you stop helping sooner? I never know how to answer that in one sentence. Because when you've spent your entire life being told you're the dependable one, you don't realize you're carrying everyone else's weight. You just think that's what love looks like. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Raleigh, North Carolina. It wasn't wealthy, but it was comfortable. My father, Richard Bennett, worked as an operations manager for a manufacturing company. My mother, Linda, taught elementary school before staying home when my younger brother, Ethan, was born. For a long time, I believed we were an ordinary family. Looking back, I realize we were only ordinary if you ignored who was always expected to give, and who was always allowed to take. Ethan was 3 years younger than me. He had an easy smile that made strangers adore him within minutes. Teachers called him charming. Neighbors said he had a big heart. Even when he got into trouble, people described him as just being Ethan. I was different. I followed rules. I finished my homework before dinner. I kept my room clean without being asked. If something needed to be done, I did it. Not because I loved chores, because somewhere along the way I learned that being helpful earned approval. At least I thought it did. One of my earliest memories is from elementary school. I had spent weeks preparing for the county science fair. It wasn't anything extraordinary, a simple project about water filtration, but I poured everything into it. Dad promised he would leave work early. Mom circled the date on the family calendar with a bright red marker. The morning of the competition, I wore my nicest blue sweater because Mom said pictures would be taken. I kept looking toward the entrance, waiting to see my parents. They never came. When I got home that afternoon with a second-place ribbon, the house was quiet except for the television. Mom was sitting beside Ethan on the couch. His ankle was wrapped in an elastic bandage. "What happened?" I asked. "He twisted it at soccer practice," Mom said, gently rubbing his shoulder. "It scared him." Dad walked in from the kitchen, carrying ice cream. "There she is," he said. "How'd it go?" "I got second place." "That's wonderful." He smiled, but his attention drifted back to Ethan almost immediately. "How's the ankle now, buddy?" I stood there holding my ribbon. No one asked to see my project. No one asked how I felt. That night, Mom hugged me before bed. "I'm sorry we missed it." "It's okay." "You know your brother needed us." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. She kissed my forehead. "You've always been the strong one." At 8 years old, those words made me proud. I had no idea they'd become the explanation for almost every disappointment that followed. As we got older, the pattern only became clearer. When I earned straight A's in high school, my parents congratulated me over dinner. When Ethan barely passed algebra the next semester, they took him out for steak because they wanted to boost his confidence. When I received a partial scholarship to North Carolina State University, Dad shook my hand and said, "We knew you could do it." When Ethan got accepted to a community college after being rejected from 2 others, my parents threw a backyard barbecue for the entire family. I remember helping Mom arrange folding chairs while relatives arrived carrying desserts. One of my aunts smiled at me. "So, when do we celebrate you?" Before I could answer, Mom laughed. "Oh, Claire never likes being the center of attention." That wasn't true. I just wasn't given the chance very often. College was the first time I lived away from home. I worked 25 hours a week in the university library to cover expenses the scholarship didn't pay. Some weekends, my roommates went to the beach. I stayed behind because every extra shift meant graduating with less debt. Whenever Mom called, the conversations sounded almost identical. "How are your classes?" "Good." "Are you eating enough?" "I am." "That's my girl." Then she'd tell me about Ethan. He switched majors again. He lost another part-time job. He borrowed Dad's truck and backed it into a mailbox. Every story ended with the same sentence. "We're just trying to help him find his way." I believed them. Families help each other. That's what families do. After graduation, I accepted an entry-level accounting position in Raleigh. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was stable. I rented a tiny apartment with outdated carpet and noisy neighbors. It wasn't glamorous, it was mine. A year later, Ethan dropped out of college. He said school wasn't for him. Dad blamed the professors. Mom blamed the pressure. No one blamed Ethan. Instead, they focused on helping him figure out what came next. One Sunday afternoon, we gathered for Dad's birthday. While Mom sliced cake, Ethan announced he wanted to start a mobile car detailing business. "It'll take off," he said confidently. "I've done the research." Dad looked impressed. "What do you need?" "Just a little help getting started." Mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We'll figure something out." Then Dad turned toward me. "Claire." "Yeah? You're doing well now, I guess. You've always been good with money." I smiled politely. "I try." He nodded. "I wish your brother had your discipline." It sounded like a compliment, but something about it made me uneasy. Because even while praising me, they were still talking about Ethan. The rest of the afternoon revolved around business ideas, equipment costs, and how everyone could support him. No one asked about the promotion I'd received the week before. No one mentioned the professional certification I'd spent nearly a year studying for. When I left that evening, Mom hugged me tightly. "We're proud of you." "I know. And thank you for always understanding." Those words lingered all the way home. Thank you for understanding, not congratulations. Not "we're excited for you," not "tell us about your future," just "thank you for making this easy." For years, I convinced myself that was enough. I told myself love didn't have to look the same for every child. I told myself my parents depended on me because they trusted me. I told myself Ethan simply needed more support. I repeated those thoughts so often they became facts in my own mind. Until one ordinary Tuesday evening, when my phone rang just after dinner. Mom's name appeared on the screen. The moment I answered, I heard the strain in her voice. "Claire, sweetheart, we hate to ask." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" She took a shaky breath. "It's your father." There was a pause. Then she quietly said the words I had heard so many times before. "We just need a little money." And somehow, even before she explained why, I already knew exactly who this was really about. I didn't ask how much. That was the first mistake I made over and over again. Instead, I asked the question I always asked. "What happened?" Mom sighed into the phone, the kind of sigh that immediately made me feel guilty for even needing an explanation. "Your father's truck needs a new transmission." "Is he okay?" "He's fine. It's just, without the truck, he can't get around." "I thought he still had the warranty." "It expired." There was another pause. "We're short about $2,200. I looked across my apartment at the framed photo hanging above my desk. It was the picture taken the day I earned my CPA license. I remembered how proud I had been. I also remembered that my parents hadn't attended the ceremony because Ethan had been having a rough week after another breakup. Back then, I'd told myself it wasn't important. Now I quietly opened my banking app. "I can transfer it tonight." Mom's relief came so quickly that I barely finished the sentence. "Oh, sweetheart, I knew we could count on you." Those words should have made me feel appreciated. Instead, they made me feel expected. Within 10 minutes, the money was gone from my account. Dad called later that evening. "I'll pay you back. You don't have to worry about that." "No," he insisted. "I mean it." He sounded sincere. He always did. But somehow, repayment never happened. Not because they refused, because another emergency always arrived first. A few months later, it was a burst water pipe, then unexpected dental work, then medication insurance didn't fully cover, then property taxes. Then the air conditioning stopped working during one of the hottest summers North Carolina had seen in years. Every situation sounded reasonable. Every request came wrapped in embarrassment. Every conversation ended exactly the same way. "You've always been such a blessing." And every time I transferred the money. At first, I kept careful records. I even labeled each transfer in my banking app. Roof repair, medical expense. Dad's truck insurance gap. Eventually, there were too many to organize. Helping simply became part of my monthly budget. Not because anyone forced me, because somewhere deep inside, I believed good daughters showed up when they were needed. Around that time, my own life started moving forward. I was promoted to senior financial controller. The raise was substantial. For the first time, buying a house didn't feel like a distant dream. I spent weekends touring neighborhoods around Raleigh, nothing extravagant, just a modest 3-bedroom home with enough space for a small garden and a home office. I found one I loved. The backyard had 2 old maple trees and a wraparound porch. I could picture myself drinking coffee there every Sunday morning. The mortgage broker smiled after reviewing my finances. "You've done a fantastic job saving." "I've tried." One thing stood out, though. "What?" He turned the monitor slightly toward me. "Your monthly transfers." I immediately knew what he meant. "There are a lot of recurring payments. They're temporary." "They've been temporary for almost 6 years. I laughed awkwardly. "It's family." He nodded politely. "I understand." Then he added something that stayed with me. "Just make sure you're building your future, too." At the time, I smiled and thanked him. I had no idea how much I would think about those words later. Not long after that, Ethan invited everyone to dinner. That alone was unusual. He rarely hosted anything. When I arrived, I realized why. He wanted to announce another business venture. "This one's different," he said confidently. "I've partnered with a friend." Dad looked excited. Mom practically glowed with pride. "What kind of business?" "Outdoor event rentals. Tents, tables, equipment, weddings, festivals, company events. It'll make great money." I asked the obvious question. "How are you funding it?" He smiled. "We've got it covered." Dad quickly changed the subject. "So, Claire, how's work?" "It's good." "You still thinking about buying that house?" "I am." Mom reached across the table. "Oh, sweetheart, I hope you won't stretch yourself too thin." I blinked. "I'm being careful." "We just don't want you taking on too much." The irony almost made me laugh. The only person at that table who had ever consistently lived within their means was the one being warned about financial responsibility. Meanwhile, no one asked Ethan how much debt he was taking on. No one questioned his projections. No one suggested caution. They simply believed him, the way they always had. And a few weeks later, Mom called again. This time she sounded flustered. "I hate asking." "It's okay." "No, it isn't." I waited. "Ethan's been helping your father around the house." That caught my attention. "Helping? Since when?" "And he hurt his shoulder." "Did he go to the doctor?" "Yes." "The insurance deductible is higher than we expected." "How much?" $1,700. I frowned. "I thought he had health insurance." "He does. This is just—" She hesitated. "What's left?" I transferred the money that afternoon. A month later, I saw Ethan helping a friend move furniture without any sign of an injured shoulder. I almost asked about it. Instead, I convinced myself I must have misunderstood. And there was something else I ignored. Whenever I visited my parents, Ethan always seemed surprisingly comfortable. New television, latest smartphone, weekend trips. Season tickets to local hockey games. Nothing outrageously expensive, but enough to make me wonder. Especially for someone who constantly seemed to be struggling financially. One afternoon, while helping Mom organize the garage, I casually mentioned it. "Ethan seems to be doing okay," she smiled. "He deserves a little happiness." "I know. I was just surprised." "He works hard." I nodded slowly. "So do you." She said it automatically, almost absent-mindedly. Then she immediately asked me to help move another storage box. The conversation ended there, just like so many others. Over the next year, I delayed buying the house. Twice. Every time I felt financially ready, another family emergency appeared. Sometimes I barely noticed the pattern anymore, until Denise noticed it for me. She and I met for lunch every other Friday. She knew almost everything about my family. After listening to me explain why I'd postponed buying the house again, she put down her fork. "Claire." "What?" "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When was the last time your parents asked Ethan for help?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. "They probably don't tell me." Maybe. She took a sip of iced tea. Or maybe they don't ask. I immediately defended them. They've helped him plenty. I didn't ask if they've helped him. She held my eyes. I asked when they've expected him to help them. The distinction hit me harder than I expected, because I honestly couldn't remember. Not one phone call, not one request, not one sacrifice they had asked him to make. Only me. Always me. At that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Denise's question, so I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into my online banking history and expanded the search beyond the last 12 months, then 2 years, then 5. Transfer after transfer appeared on my screen. Some were small, others were thousands of dollars. The descriptions brought back memories I'd almost forgotten. Dad's medication, emergency plumbing, roof repair, car repair, hospital bill. As I entered the amounts into a spreadsheet, another detail caught my attention. Several of the transfers happened only weeks apart. Some of the explanations sounded strangely similar. A few dates overlapped in ways that didn't make sense. I stared at the screen, then at my calculator, then back at the dates. Something wasn't adding up. For the first time in my life, I wondered if the emergencies I had been paying for were really the emergencies I had been told about. I wish I could tell you I picked up the phone the next morning and demanded answers. I didn't. That's not who I was. When you've spent decades trusting the same people, you don't suddenly wake up believing they've lied to you. Instead, you convince yourself there must be another explanation. Maybe I had entered something incorrectly into my spreadsheet. Maybe I was missing receipts. Maybe my memory wasn't as good as I thought it was. I closed my laptop and went to bed telling myself I was overthinking everything. But once a question enters your mind, it's difficult to silence it. Especially when you're an accountant. Numbers don't care about feelings. They either make sense or they don't. Over the next few weeks, I found myself paying attention in a way I never had before. Not because I wanted to catch my parents doing something wrong, because I wanted to prove to myself they weren't. That was the strange part. I was looking for reasons to trust them. Instead, I kept finding reasons to wonder. One Saturday afternoon, Mom invited me over for lunch. Ethan was already there. He was sitting comfortably in Dad's recliner, scrolling through his phone while Mom carried plates to the table. "Hey, Claire," he said without looking up. "Hey." Dad came in from the backyard, wiping his hands on an old towel. "The fence finally gave out." He laughed. "Guess that's another project." Ethan smiled. "You should hire somebody," Dad chuckled. "Maybe." I looked at my brother. "You could probably help him." "I've got a busy week." "Busy doing what?" I almost asked. Instead, I kept eating. The conversation drifted to Ethan's newest landscaping business. Apparently it was going well. At least that's what everyone kept saying. "We've already booked several clients," Mom said proudly. I looked at Ethan. "That's great." "It is." "So business is picking up?" He nodded. "Finally," I smiled. "I'm happy for you." And I meant it. I had never wanted Ethan to fail. I just wanted him to carry his own life. Then Dad said something that caught my attention. "We're hoping things stabilize soon." "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated. "Oh, just everything." I frowned. "What exactly?" Mom answered before he could. "Life's expensive." That was true, but it wasn't an answer. A few days later, my phone rang just before I left work. "Mom." I answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom." "Sweetheart." She sounded nervous. My shoulders tightened automatically. "What happened?" "It's nothing serious." I waited. "We're just a little short this month." "For what?" "The electric bill." "How much?" $900. I blinked. Our electric bill was never anywhere close to that when I lived at home. "It includes some other things." "What other things?" Silence. Then she laughed awkwardly. "Oh, you know how bills add up." I stared out the office window. "Can you send me the bill?" Another pause. "You don't believe me?" "I didn't say that." "You've never asked before." "I know. So why now?" "Because nothing makes sense anymore. Because every emergency somehow arrives with a different story. Because I'm starting to feel like I'm solving problems I can't even see." But I didn't say any of that. I just want to understand. Her voice became noticeably colder. I didn't realize helping your parents came with an audit. The sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it was cruel, because it was designed to make me feel ashamed. I apologized. I actually apologized. I'm sorry. It's okay, she replied immediately, her warm voice returning. I know you're under stress. I'll figure something out. After we hung up, I sat in my office for almost 20 minutes. I never sent the money, not because I had decided to stop helping, because she had never answered the question. $900 for electricity. It simply didn't make sense. On the following weekend, Denise invited me over for coffee. She could tell something was bothering me before I even spoke. You asked for a bill, didn't you? I nodded. How'd that go? I ended up apologizing. She leaned back in her chair. Claire. I know. No. You don't. She looked directly at me. Healthy people don't make you feel guilty for asking normal questions. I stared into my coffee. I keep thinking maybe I'm being unfair. Why? They're my parents. They've always been there. She smiled gently. And you've always been there. That sentence settled somewhere deep inside me. I had spent years measuring everything my parents had done for me. I had never stopped to measure what I had done for them. Over the next month, I noticed another pattern. Every family gathering revolved around Ethan. If he had good news, everyone celebrated. If he had bad news, everyone worried. If he had no news at all, someone still asked how he was doing. Meanwhile, my life seemed to exist in the background. When I mentioned receiving another promotion at work, Mom smiled proudly. Oh, that's wonderful. Then she turned toward Ethan. Did you ever hear back about that equipment loan? Within seconds, everyone was discussing financing options for his business. No one asked about my promotion again, not once. It shouldn't have hurt. But it did, because it wasn't one conversation. It was 30 years of conversations exactly like it. Not a few days later, I received an unexpected call from an old family friend named Harold. He had known my parents since before Ethan and I were born. I ran into your father yesterday. How's he doing? Oh, he'll be okay. There was something unusual in his voice. What is it? I probably shouldn't say anything. Harold, he sighed. I just hope your brother gets himself together. My heart skipped. What do you mean? Another silence. I thought you knew. Knew what? He hesitated long enough that I almost thought he'd hung up. Finally, he spoke. I've said too much already. Harold, please. I really can't. The line went quiet. Then he said one sentence that echoed in my mind for days. Your parents have protected Ethan longer than you realize. He apologized and ended the call. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Protected him from what? Business failure, debt, something worse? For the first time in my life, I stopped accepting every family story at face value. I started remembering little moments I'd ignored. Dad selling his fishing boat years earlier. Mom quietly cashing out a retirement account. The mysterious loan they never talked about again. The second mortgage that seemed to disappear from conversation overnight. At the time, every explanation had sounded reasonable. Now they looked connected, like pieces of a puzzle I had never tried to assemble. I opened my spreadsheet again. This time, I wasn't just recording my transfers. I started creating a timeline. My payments, their emergencies, Ethan's business ventures, his new truck, his apartment moves, his failed companies. The dates overlapped far more often than chance should have allowed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. There was a pattern. I just couldn't see all of it yet. Then, before I had the chance to dig any deeper, my phone rang just after 6 o'clock on a rainy Thursday evening. It was my mother. She wasn't crying. She was screaming. Claire, what happened? It's your father. I was already grabbing my keys. He collapsed in the kitchen. The ambulance just took him. They think, her voice broke completely, they think he's had a stroke. The first time my mother called after everything was over, I knew why before I answered. Some habits take years to break. Some voices never lose the ability to tighten your chest. Her name appeared on my phone just as I was finishing dinner in the home I had finally purchased for myself. Not a mansion, not a statement, just a quiet brick house on the edge of Raleigh with a wraparound porch, 2 maple trees, and enough space to build the peaceful life I had postponed for nearly 20 years. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. Months earlier, I would have answered before the second ring. Now I took a breath first, then I answered. "Hi, Mom." She sounded older than I remembered, not weaker, just tired. "Hi, sweetheart." There was an awkward silence. Neither of us knew how to speak to each other anymore. Finally, she asked, "How's the new house?" "It's good. I'm happy you're settled." "Thank you." Another silence. Then she said the words I had expected all along. "We need a little help." I closed my eyes, not because I was angry, because I was sad. Even now, even after the bank records, after the trust documents, after the attorney confirmed that my inheritance had been sacrificed to cover Ethan's failures, after Dad admitted they had spent years convincing themselves I would always recover. The first thing she reached for wasn't reconciliation. It was help. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "The furnace went out." I waited. "And?" "We can't afford to replace it." "What about Ethan?" She hesitated. "He's trying." It was the exact same answer I had heard for decades. "He's trying." One sentence that had justified everything. I looked around my living room. Every piece of furniture had been chosen by me. Every bill had been paid by me. Every wall represented a decision I had made without asking permission or apologizing for succeeding. For the first time in my life, I realized something. Their emergency was no longer automatically my responsibility. I spoke gently. "I'm sorry you're going through that." She waited. When I said nothing else, she whispered, "Claire." "I can't." Her breathing caught. "You're really saying no?" "Yes. I've never said no because I stopped loving you." I paused. "I'm saying no because I finally started loving myself." Neither of us spoke. Eventually, she quietly said goodbye. There were no insults, no dramatic accusations, only silence. When the call ended, I cried. Not because I regretted my answer, because I was mourning the daughter I had spent so many years trying to be. The consequences unfolded slowly. My parents could no longer maintain the lifestyle they had built around constant financial rescues. Without my monthly transfers, old debts became impossible to ignore. The second mortgage they had hidden for years came due. Medical bills that had been deferred could no longer be postponed. They made the difficult decision to sell the family home, the house where Ethan and I had grown up, the house where every Christmas morning had begun, the house where I learned to become the strong one. Watching strangers carry furniture out through the front door was strangely emotional. Not because I wanted the house, because I realized the building had never truly been the home I kept trying to protect. A home requires honesty, and ours had been built on secrets. Ethan's life changed even more dramatically. For the first time, there was no one left to absorb the consequences of his choices. No hidden transfers, no emergency checks, no quiet conversations between our parents and creditors. He sold the expensive truck, moved into a smaller apartment, took a steady job managing operations for a regional landscaping company instead of chasing another business dream. The first time we met for coffee after almost a year of distance, he looked different, older, humbler. "I didn't know," he said before either of us ordered. "I believe you." "I swear I didn't." "I know." He looked down at the table. "I thought Mom and Dad were just helping me." "They were." "I never realized where the money came from." "Neither had I, not completely." He rubbed his hands together. "I spent years thinking they believed in me." I smiled sadly. "They did." they just believed in saving you more than protecting anyone else? Tears filled his eyes. I don't know how to fix that. You can't. He looked up. What do I do? For once, I said softly, you build your own life. Without expecting someone else to pay for it. He nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was the beginning of accountability. And sometimes that's enough. A few weeks later, my attorney called with the final update. The remaining assets from my grandmother's trust had finally been transferred. Not everything had been recovered. Too much had already been spent years earlier. But enough remained to honor what my grandmother had originally intended. When I signed the final paperwork, I didn't feel victorious. I felt connected to someone who had tried to give both of her grandchildren an equal future. She never imagined one child's share would quietly disappear to protect the other. I hoped wherever she was, she would know the truth had finally surfaced. Life became quieter after that. Not perfect, just peaceful. I planted flowers beneath the maple trees that first spring, started taking Sunday mornings slowly instead of treating them as catch-up days. I reconnected with friends I had canceled on too many times because of another family emergency. I even framed my CPA certificate and hung it in my home office. For years, it had stayed inside a drawer, almost as if I believed my accomplishments shouldn't take up space. Now they did. So did I. People sometimes ask whether I forgive my parents. The honest answer is complicated. I no longer carry anger every day. Anger is exhausting. But forgiveness doesn't require pretending something never happened. It doesn't erase the years. It doesn't erase the birthdays, the canceled plans, the hidden bank transfers, or the inheritance that was quietly taken before I even knew it existed. Forgiveness, for me, meant accepting that I could never change who they had been. Boundaries meant deciding who I would become. Those are not the same thing. A few months ago, I walked through my backyard just before sunset. The maple trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my phone wasn't buzzing with another crisis. No urgent request, no guilty explanation. No reminder that someone else's life mattered more than mine. Just silence. The kind of silence that once frightened me. Now it felt like freedom. I stood there for a long time, looking at the home I had built. Not just the house, but the life. A life where love was no longer measured by how much I sacrificed. A life where saying no didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. And if there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Sometimes the child everyone calls selfish is simply the first one who stops paying for everyone else's choices. Walking away didn't destroy my family. The lies had already done that. Walking away simply gave me the chance to finally stop disappearing inside someone else's story and start living my own.